Welcome back to the channel, everyone. Captain C.A. Richardson here, and I've got something cool for you today on FlatsClass YouTube. We're going to be talking about snook. We're going to be talking about a recent trip that I just got back from filming down in Naples, Florida, Marco actually, the Goodland Zone, and I did that with Captain Robbie Walzak. We had some challenging conditions, but we're going to talk about skipping bushes. You know, this is the time of year where it's springtime, we're moving to summer, those tide heights are getting higher and higher and higher, and the fish slide under the trees, and you're going to know what lures and what rod actions are going to be best for doing that. Even the leader system is going to matter. I'm going to share that with you here in a minute, but first I wanted to thank all of you that have been loyal subscribers for a long time. We did it. We made it to 40,000 subs. That's right. Now at 50,000 subs, our next goal, we will hire a full-time camera guy. I promise you, we're going to be doing a lot more stuff. But you already have 1,000 fishing tips on this channel, so there's a lot of you that need to catch up. All right, let's go inside my shop here. I'm going to teach you something that I've been teaching at FlatsClass University for a while. So it's these leader systems, it's these rod actions, and the actual baits, putting it all together to make you, well, a better snook fisherman under the bushes. Let's go. How all this tangled wood, this dead wood, and all these live roots in here are just perfect spots. It's the perfect habitat for these snook, just to kind of back in and lay there. And Rob and I are just basically just skipping this stuff all the way to the hardest line that we can find, which is the hard root wall, and then just swimming it back out. We're catching more than our share of small fish, but eventually you will get a big fish. You just got to make a big time commitment to fishing this style. If you do, I mean, like all day, you will catch the one you want. After watching that little bit of live action on the water, you could get a good idea of the style of fishing that I'm talking about when I say skipping bushes. As we move in to late spring, and then eventually into the early summer months, you're going to notice that tide heights are going to gradually get higher and higher and higher. Now, if you live in a region and you're watching this and you don't have these mangrove islands or main shorelines, you can apply a lot of this to dock fishing. There's very little difference. I would say the biggest difference is when you're doing the mangrove fishing. The challenge is there's just so many snags that you have to negotiate. So rigging the bait is critical to keeping it out of, well, the hang-ups. And here's the deal. If you're not, in there, let me show you a little picture. This, okay, is my crude primitive drawing of a mangrove. But here are the tangled mangrove roots down here, and the blue line is the water line. And you can see how the bush kind of grows over the water and creates a shady zone right in there. There's a big shade zone in there. So what happens is many of us will skip the lures, and I'll try to point with this, and they'll land in here somewhere. You're skipping and landing right in here. Well, I'm going to tell you right now, you need to skip all the way back, boom, 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 right to that root wall there. If you get back to that root wall, you will catch snook consistently. The problem is you will consistently hang up your tackle. You just will. It's not a place for treble hook plugs. You can fish an open jig head. In fact, Rob fished an open jig head quite a bit. He's a very accurate caster, super accurate. And he was pitching to more of what he calls the holes. Those are the breaks in the branches where it creates just a big enough hole about the size of a trash can lid where you can push a bait or flick a bait back in there, and then he would work it out. And he did really well with that, albeit you do get a lot of snags if you make an errant cast or you hit a shoreline that doesn't have smooth water and has those little wavelets. Because what happens is when you skip, it hits one of those little wavelets, it ramps the bait up, and now your bait's traveling higher than you anticipated and it gets caught up in there. And then getting it free, well, most of the time you're going in there and getting it. The other thing is, and this is something I could help Rob with, was I prefer a little bit longer leader when I fish these zones. You might say, why do you prefer the longer leader? If I have at least a 3.5 to 4 foot leader, when I get into an area, and I'll pull this one out, into an area where a fish whacks this jig. I mean, just whacks it, okay? He's got it, and he runs down the bush line and gets around something. If I've got only that much leader and the rest of this is braid up here, and let's say you're using 15 or 20 pound braid, that braid in the wood cuts into it. So it will lock up and the fish will stop, and he'll probably tear this out of his mouth. So by having that thicker, longer leader, if he gets around something initially, it kind of stops him, and because it's nice and round and heavier, you can force him back around that little mangrove root or branch. So it works really well. Now, let me break down the system from the bait all the way down to the rod and reel. And we're going to do that right now. All right, let's talk about the bait first. I have found that as of last summer, when Z-Man launched the Mulletron, they launched it in 4 sizes. And many of you don't know this. There's 2 that are rigged, which are called the Mulletron LTs. LT stands for line through, and that's the 4.5 and the 6.0. I usually use those for dock fishing or for fishing for tarpon or bridge fishing or something like that. I'm not really skipping mangroves with them that often, although I did do it in this particular episode of FlatsClass TV filming with Rob Walzak. But a better choice is the 3.3 or the 4.0, with the 4.0 being the best rig like this. And you're like, well, it doesn't look like anything special to me, CA. Well, here is kind of the deal. This bait is buoyant enough, especially with this bulbous tail. It's not like a paddle tail. A paddle tail will sink. What happens with this bait, and I've got it rigged, this is a 3 or a 4/0 ZWG, okay, and I'll pull it out here. ZWG rigging hook from Z-Man, okay? And when I put it inside this bait has a hook slot. The whole thing probably weighs just, I'm gonna say 3/8, maybe a tad heavier, but it doesn't sink. It gives me the ability to float the bait in the cover. And why I say that is this bait is buoyant, beefy enough where when it hits the water, it sinks, but it sinks tail up and it barely sinks. So when I skip it in there and it's hanging there, I can reel it out slow, and I usually pulse it and this tail just kind of brr, brr. So I can reel it a little, stop it, reel it a little, stop it, reel it a little, stop it, twitch it a little, and it doesn't come right out. So it allows me to float it in the cover in there for a long period of time, which gets this thing bit. If you're a friend of Rob Walzak or you talk to him, I am sure he will back me up on this, because he thought this was the difference maker in catching those fish that day. Now, what's nice about this hook also is the fact that this ZWG comes with that little silicone bead on the hook bend. And you're like, oh, what's the purpose of that? Well, when you tuck this bait or the hook inside the bait and run it up on the back, you push that bead up in there and it doesn't allow that tail to come down until a fish eats it. That way you can skip and you can skip and you can skip. And you're not reeling it back and readjusting the tail, reeling it back and really, adjusting that tail, which drives all of us crazy that enjoy skipping docks or skipping mangroves. So this allows me to skip harder and really drive it in there, because remember, if you're not in this zone where the roots are, you're not catching them. So you gotta make those deep skips. What's a deep skip? Sometimes it's only 3 or 4 feet. Most of the time, it's about 10 to 15 feet back underneath there, especially when you can see like a little drain in the wall in the back. That's where the biggest, baddest snook hang out. That's where they live. The smaller ones will be closer to the outside and you'll get stuck catching plenty of them because you'll throw and skip in there and you'll hit a root or a branch, or it just won't go as well as you think. It'll fall short, and when you're reeling it out, a smaller male snook will grab it. But the best fish, the bigger fish, the ones you want to catch are way back in there. Now, running from this ZWG, which is an 1/8 ounce, just to give it some weight, I usually run close to 4 foot, at least 3.5, of anywhere from 30 to 40 pound leader. Just depends on where we're fishing, the size of the fish. I find in this situation, because I'm going through so many guides and I'm casting so hard, that the FG knot is the best knot to use, okay? And that's usually about 30 turns for me on this line. This is 15-pound braid that I've got on here. This is from Diamond Fishing Products. This is their 15-pound braid, and it's a color that I'm testing for them right now, and I can't say too much about it or they'll get mad at me. I recommend using 4,000 size reels if you're going to use spinning gear. Now, I use a lot of casting gear because I feel like I have even more retrieve control with it. And it gives me the opportunity, if I see a fish on the outside or in some logs that don't have tree cover, I can actually cast to them or pitch to them much more accurately. But if you're gonna use spinning gear, use something like this. I got a piece of line up. This is a 4,000 Shimano Vanford. And like I said, it's got 15-pound braid on it. This is the Fitzgerald 7.2 medium heavy. This is their Aqua Dream blank. I love this blank. It's got just enough tip. Let me wrap this line around so I'm gonna back up for you. It's got just enough tip, okay? But it's mostly back bend. You see it only bends in that first 20%. So it's a very fast taper. So it's the perfect rod to be able to load this up. Remember, this weighs 3/8 to 1/2 ounce. Probably more like 3/8 to 7/16. That you can drive it in there, gets back in there. But when a fish hits it, you can hit him and you can pull him out if that drag is nutted down. Now, I put basically the max drag I can almost on this stuff because I know using 15 or 20 pound braid and having an FG knot and having a strong rod, that I should be able to do a head turner and get them to lead them out, because you're not doing yourself any favor letting them run around under the trees. They're going to get you. And when a fish does eat that jig and start swimming with it, make sure you keep that rod tip low to the water and pull him out. If you keep that rod tip too high, the angle of that line will start catching those bushes. And in many of these salty environments that aren't around rivers and stuff, there's a lot of barnacles and you're going to get cut off for sure. You're just going to have a mess. Now, next I want to talk about my casting rod outfit that I use and that rod setup. So let's get that one out next. With a little practice, same lure. This is just a different color. This is just the Gold Rush color. And basically, this is the exact same hook that I'm using. Same leader weight, 30 pounds. Obviously, I did a little whittling on this one. This one's down to about 3.5 feet. Same type of knot, FG knot. But the difference with the casting gear, and with a little practice, yes, you can skip very well with casting gear when you set your reel up right. I'm using 30 pound. This is the green Diamond Fishing Products. They make a really supple line that is easy to cast. This is the Baits Fishing Company's goat reel. If you look right here, okay, it's got a nice big power handle on it. I have over, if I remember right, I have close to like 20 pounds of drag on this particular reel. And with this having a centrifugal brake and a magnetic brake, a dual braking system, they call it the matrix system, it is very easy for me to have max drag, set the tension knobs where this lure falls at a nice steady pace down, not too loose. I can skip it in there. Now, the rod is really the difference maker here, and I'm going to tell you why. In many cases, I'm skipping the 4.5 line through with this setup a lot. But it did a good job with this bait as well. And this is maybe one of my favorite rods from it's in the Fitzgerald All-Purpose Series. This is their 7'3" medium heavy, okay? It's a great all-around rod. Use it a ton. But for me, again, this is one of those rods that has a fast taper. I'll back up and show it to you. So it's basically the same thing. Let me wrap this around my hand. See how it only bends in that little bit at the tip? The rest of it's all spine, all backbone. So again, a little bit of practice, roll it right under there like a golf ball, goes all the way back. And it's a lot easier than you think, especially when you start upping the weight. I might go to the 4/0 hook with this bait sometimes and throw it on the 1/8 ounce and it'll roll back there. Then it's a definite 1/2 ounce, which fits right in the wheelhouse of this. Or I'll just throw the 4.5 inch Mulletron line through and I can roll it under any of that stuff. Now, this, like I said, you've seen me do videos on this rod set up before for skipping. It works fantastic if I'm doing it around docks and I've got more room to work with. In this scenario, we had some open zones between live trees that had some deadfalls in it. And in those deadfalls, you could see fish sometimes, and even some redfish would mill around in there. And it's nice to have a rod like this right there on the deck next to that trusty skip and spinning rod that you can make an accurate cast. But I did discover something when we were fishing with Rob. It was so windy, and we were trying to get closer to the mangroves to get back in there. A little closer than I'm comfortable with. So I picked this rod up, which I usually use for topwater fishing a lot. This is a 6'8" medium heavy. This is a composite rod from Fitzgerald, okay? This is their composite rod. I've got 30-pound braid. This is a Baits Hundo. It's a very small reel, almost finesse-like reel, but it packs 14 pounds of drag. It only weighs 5 ounces. So honestly, when you're throwing this thing, fatigue is never a factor. But because this is a 6'8" rod, I could not believe the backhanded accuracy I had with it. And the ability when he had the trolling motor part, you know, the front of the boat and I had to be behind him, I could still make little flicks and get it way in there. Plus I can pitch pretty good with this rod. So it was a great setup. And I loved the shorter handle. I love short handles on casting gear. For me, it's just the bomb. And I'll show you again, same type of rod type where, see how it just bends in the tip? Doesn't bend deep in the blank, only in the tip. When you're fishing structure or cover like mangroves or structure like docks, you have to have pulling power. That's the #1 thing. You have to have enough tip to put the lure where the fish are, but you definitely have to have enough, pardon the expression, ass to be able to pull them from that cover. If you don't, you get that zzz, zzz, pow, zing, zing, pow, and that sucks. It just sucks. Ask me how I know, because I used to try to do it with more comfortable rods, lighter rods all the time. I was pretty good at making those bites happen, but I sucked at getting the fish out of those zones. And once I adopted the fact that, listen, I've got to get better with these heavier rod actions. If I'm going to be a good fisherman and be able to take fish from cover, I've got to be better with these heavier rod actions. And a lot of that is just finding the right stuff to fish with. And the fishing rod is a big part of that. A big reason why I partnered with Fitzgerald Fishing is because Trevor and his guys and Ben and those guys, they design rods that are more for artificials and fishing different types of cover. Their bass actions are what they are, and that's why they're so good. So if you're a hardcore inshore guy that loves to throw artificials, you should really start looking into the Fitzgerald rod lineup. You're gonna find a lot of sweet rods in there that will throw some of your favorite lures. All right, I thought I wanted to share that little tip, and a big thank you for Rob Walzak here that put me on some great fish. We must have caught doggone near 24 snook that day, and probably 5 or 6 of them pretty doggone worthy, and you'll see them in a brand new season of FlatsClass that starts to launch actually next week on Bally Sports Florida, and then the following week you'll see them on waypointtv.com. So look for the new season. Also, early on I said subscribe to the channel. If you haven't done that, do it. We've got hundreds, if not coming up, thousands of fishing tips. And if this type of stuff really trips your trigger, you're like, wow, I'd really like to fish in Tangletown, which we call the Mangrove country. Even better, go over to FlatsClassUniversity.com. See what we have for you over there. That is an online fishing school where we teach you how to be the best inshore angler you can be. Plus, you get deep, deep discounts from my partner, Sodium Fishing Gear, at sodiumusa.com. It makes it more than worth your while. All right, until next time, you guys keep those rods bent, and I'll keep those videos coming.